and welcome. I'm Hillary Raimo. Joining me tonight for an hour of inspirational, uplifting conversation is twice Grammy-nominated, multifaceted musician, visionary artist, and author David Young. David is best known for playing 2 Renaissance flutes at one time and selling over 1 million copies of his popular CDs. He started his company with his last $100 at Venice Beach in 1990 under the name Celestial Winds, and now has over 300,000 people every day listening to his uplifted music by his 60 recorded albums at healing centers and hospitals around the world. He started painting in 2011, and his career transformed into meditation events in 2015 after he wrote 3 books and now does spiritual events all over the world. Hopefully, this is going to be a fantastic conversation, I have no doubt. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Hillary.
So how are you? I haven't seen you since MUFON. I actually want to tell everybody listening that I was at my book launch at the 49th Annual National MUFON Conference, and I met David there. He was performing and selling his beautiful artwork and his fantastic music. So what's going on? Tell us what you're up to now.
Well, I just did my 357th meditation event that's called A Portal Between Heaven and Earth. And I do about 15 or 16 of these meditation events each month all over the country. And so right now I'm on the Hamptons on Long Island, and I just did 4 events in Pennsylvania last week, and I'm a traveling man.
Busy changing the world, it sounds. So I'm going to jump right in and ask you this question and start off this beautiful hour. Describe for me what it was like for you to realize that you were a sound healer.
Well, I've been playing music all my life, basically since I'm 7 years old, and I'm 57 now. And the unique thing that happened when I started doing events in 2014 was that I found that people were having these experiences where they were reconnecting with their loved ones, like a mom or a dad or a grandmother or a friend from childhood who died young. And I found out that was possible at my very first event, because I did storytelling for about 45 minutes, and then I did a half-hour meditation, and when the meditation was over, I asked if anyone wanted to share their experiences, and 5 people in the audience shared that they reconnected with one of their loved ones, and that's how I found out it was possible.
Were you surprised? Did this shock you?
Yeah. Oh, my God. I was totally surprised. I had been meditating for 30 years at that point, and I had many experiences of seeing the inner purple light or the inner white light, but I didn't know it was possible to have a interdimensional or a channeling experience with somebody who wasn't alive physically anymore and that was existing in the spirit world. And so it was such a shock. It was hard to hold back the surprise from my face, sitting in front of an audience, not expecting to hear 5 people share that. Like, one woman had lost her husband in 9/11, and I think it had been 13 years since that happened, and she shared that her husband showed up to her and showed her all around heaven and told her he was happy, and they told her that just do whatever you need to do to make yourself happy with life on Earth, because I am in a beautiful place over here, and you don't need to worry about me anymore. So can you imagine hearing that for the first time?
Especially at a public event. This wasn't like you were by yourself with one person. You had an audience. So I imagine that must have been quite the experience.
Yeah, it was amazing. And then the next person shared that her best friend from childhood that had died years ago, she hadn't even thought of this person in over 20 years, showed up to her and was happy, and like everybody's happy in heaven, you know.
Everybody's happy they can reach back to Earth and get through somebody like yourself to be able to contact these people, I think. So would you consider yourself a medium? Would you consider yourself a psychic, a medium of that sort, a vessel, if you will, of the spirits that want to come in and share with these people?
Well, I didn't consider myself a medium when that was happening in 2014, but my psychic abilities over the last year or two have really got much better, so I do consider myself a medium now. Back then I was just thinking of myself as a musician who played beautiful, relaxing music. And I didn't really, I didn't think I was a medium for one reason. I was able to give people guidance and predict things in people's lives, but because I couldn't do that for myself, I didn't consider myself a medium. I later found out that most professional mediums go to another medium to get personal advice for their own life. You know, it's like if you have a doctor who's a heart surgeon, he doesn't do his own open heart surgery. He has another doctor that he would go to get that work done. And so many mediums, because it's too close to do it for yourself sometimes, you know, because you're involved in your own life, it helps to have an outside person do the mediumship, you know, getting the messages. But I do get more messages for myself now than I did 4 years ago, without a doubt.
Oh, really? So what do you think brought that on?
Oh, damn, that's a good question.
I'm known for them, by the way. Good questions.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I started to, I painted in 2011 and 12, and then I stopped painting for about 3 years. And then in 2016, I started to paint again. And during that time, I was living with my girlfriend in Florida, who was a professional medium. Okay, she was an acupuncture and a professional medium. And I started to paint again just because I needed something to do when I was visiting her when she was treating her clients. And I was standing in front of a blank canvas that was 2 feet by 4 feet. And I was thinking that I should start with red in the top left corner of the painting. Now, that was a bizarre thought because I never started with red in a painting, and actually back then I didn't like the color red, you know. So I'm thinking that I should do that, which was a bizarre thought for me. And about 5 minutes later, she came into the bedroom where I was looking at this blank canvas, and she said, Salvador Dali just showed up and said that you're supposed to start with red in the top left corner of this painting.
Don't you love it when that happens?
Yeah. And so I was so flipped out by that because I thought that thought in my head was my own thought. You know, why would I think it was coming from somebody else, you know?
What do you think that is?
Like about 30 times.
Yeah.
It happened about 30 times that month where it was either something that I had just painted, that she came into the room and said, Dali said you should put green in the middle of this painting. And I'm like flipping out saying, well, I just put the green right here in the middle of the painting, you know? So that really helped to confirm my own abilities to channel because it was obvious that he was giving me this direction for my paintings. And, you know, having a confirmation like that was so valuable for me. And then after a while, what happens is you stop second-guessing yourself, you know, because it's natural for our logical mind to get in the way because that's what we're taught to do with our logical mind, you know. And the more we start trusting what's our intuition, you know, our inner spiritual guidance, the more we trust that and don't doubt it, the more magical our life can become.
What was it like for you to overcome your doubt?
Well, the thing is that people think that being skeptical is intelligent. You know, we're taught as kids, don't believe everything that you hear, okay? And so your logical mind is actually, it's not your intelligence, because your logical mind is just telling you what everybody else believes at that point in time. But your logical mind, which is connected to what we believe is normal, normal and reality and logical, those are all in the same basket, but reality actually changes. It's hard to see reality change when you're living in August of 2018, but if you think back 500 years ago, all the intelligent, educated people all completely believed that the world was flat, because that's what everybody else believed. That was normal, that was logical, that was the reality that they all accepted and they all agreed upon. But reality does change, and we're in an incredible era of change right now because spirituality is becoming such a popular thing that, 5-10 years ago, if you think about what was normal and accepted in conversations, what people spoke about, and what's normal and accepted in conversations now, it's so different just over the last 5 or 10 years, Like if you think back 30 years, people who heard voices in their head got to go to a place where other people heard voices in their head, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, people who hear voices in their head get about $150 an hour.
And lots of medication.
Yeah, right.
Right? We're living in that kind of world. But I have to say this. You seem to have bloomed over the 2012 era of massive ascension and awakening. I mean, you started painting in 2011. You started your meditation events in 2015. Do you feel that perhaps your awakening process over 2012 played a part in this?
Well, I'll tell you, if I could live through 2012, I think I could live through anything, because that was such a hard time in my life. It was like everything that I had worked for the 30 years that I had success in music. The digital age was starting, the economy was crashing. 2012 I was like hanging on by a thread. And while I was painting during that time, I was painting things that I really didn't understand what I was painting, but these things that I painted all turned out to be prophecies in my life. Painting is a very unique thing for me. It's different kind of a channeling than music, because music I've been doing for 50 years. You know what I mean? It's like I don't have to think about those things at all because I've been doing it for so long. But with painting, when I first started to paint, I definitely felt like there was a calling and it was important for me to paint. And when you are blending colors, there are times that you have no idea if what you're doing is good or bad. You're just trying to find something that is calling you, that speaks through your painting, And I found that there were times that I would be painting, that I would be turning the painting in an abstract way. So let's say you make the top the bottom, and you look at it from a completely different perspective. And what I found was that these paintings were prophecies in my life. It would take way too long for me to explain that, but there are things that I painted that a week later or a month later or a year later were like signs of things that were going to happen in my life that I couldn't tell while I was painting it.
It's fascinating. I want to let everybody listening know that you can view David's art at davidyoungart.com. He has a fabulous portfolio on there, so you can take a look at the work that we're talking about here. David, as an artist, I'm also an artist, so my life has changed drastically since 2014 also, and I've gone into creating and making art as well. I'm reminded of Jim Carrey's journey. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but lots of great YouTube videos on it where he's had a quite awakening coming out of Hollywood and going into becoming a painter and moving in with color, and he produces all kinds of amazing work now too. Do you suppose that perhaps what we're looking at is a reemergence or renaissance of the creative spirit? People seem to be having these breakdowns of reality where it opens them up and they full bloom into this massively creative space. Do you think we're looking at that's just where we're at as humanity rolls through this great cosmic soup?
Man, that's another great question you have over there. I do think that as we stretch beyond what traditionally was looked at as normal, like if you take a painter like Salvador Dali or like Picasso, they painted things that you just couldn't even imagine. You couldn't even imagine some of the crazy things that they painted, and you have to step out of reality, because the natural thing when you have a paintbrush in your hand or a colored pencil in your hand, the natural thing is to try to paint something or draw something that looks like something. It's actually not easy to create shapes or figures or objects that don't look like anything, because the natural way When we pick up a pencil, it's to try to draw a face or a stick figure or whatever it is. And when you get to that place of trying to create things that don't look like anything, what happens is that the viewer who's looking at that painting, the first natural instinct for them is to think, well, what is it? Now, if you've made a painting of an apple, somebody in the first second can tell, oh, yeah, that's an apple. It doesn't take any of my creativity to figure it out. But if you paint something that's abstract, the natural thing for every viewer to say or think when they look at that painting is, well, what is it? What's hidden in this painting that I can't see, that I need to figure out? And that actually activates a person's creativity to try to figure out what do they think this artist is trying to create. And so it interacts, it makes the viewer interact with that artwork. And a lot of times I'll create things that don't look like anything obviously, but then you get to look at it from a different angle, and then you see something that's coming through. And I think there was a really great painter that was a friend of mine. His name was Nelson Dominguez, and he said, I'm not trying to make a face that looks just like a face. Any art student can make a face that looks like a face. I'm trying to make art that makes people think and makes people wonder what it is. Because if they're wondering what it is for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or a minute, you've got a minute of their attention instead of somebody looking at an apple for 1 second and say, I don't need to look at it anymore because it's an apple. Does that make sense?
Would you say that it bypasses the critical thinking, the mind, and goes right to the emotions, and that's what people struggle with feeling or identifying?
Totally. And I think whether you're doing that with art that gets people out of their logical mind, or whether you're doing that with music, or whatever it is, our mind is really, it's kind of like an umbrella where it's most useful when you open it up. An umbrella doesn't do any good when it's closed up, but when you open it up, well, then it protects you from the rain. And your mind, if you stick to a rigid way of thinking, you're not ever, you're not going to grow. You're not going to reach your potential, because your mind is, having a sharp mind is not necessarily the goal of everything. People who are creative, who go outside of their mind, because your creativity is different than your logical mind. Your logical mind is like a calculator that can do arithmetic and figure certain things out logically. But, Albert Einstein said that the most important part of ourself is our imagination. That's the part of ourself that expands life. If we didn't expand life, we'd be way back in the past. Everything that we have, when you think of somebody who's a genius, it's really somebody who, well, there's different kinds of geniuses, of course, but when you think of somebody as a genius, it's somebody who is thinking outside the box and is looking at life or creating a product that makes life better for us. And somebody had to think out of the box to create that thing.
Do you wonder if we have downgraded our ability to do that in the current generations of life? I just seem to look around and wonder if maybe the current social climate has just degraded the ability to use the imagination, and we really have sort of demonized intuition over the years. Maybe not sort of, maybe actually. And the more that we bring it back and the more that we practice using it, it ends up creating that imagination again, bringing that back to life. Do you feel for the kids growing up in today's world? Do you think they have access to this or no?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the unique things, the difference between me growing up 50 years ago and kids growing up now, is that because there's 15 million Americans meditating or doing yoga or doing something spiritual once or twice a week, okay? When our kids or our grandkids come to us and say, Grandma, in our last lifetime, I was your mom, and we used to live in this town, and we used to wear these kind of clothes, that is something that we in 2018 don't shut down in our kids. So the positive side about it, for, if you want to call it the indigo generation or whatever generation you want to call the young people growing up now who are 5, 10, 15 years old, the positive thing for them is that they have parents and grandparents where they have a better chance of them being supportive of their own spirituality versus 50 years ago. Because 50 years ago, our parents weren't, most of our parents that I know weren't talking about anything spiritual at all. And when we wanted to talk about something spiritual to our parents, like it was just out of their realm of, it was out of their comfort zone, So the positive side is that the souls that are being born now are more likely to have open-minded, spiritually open parents or grandparents that will support their spiritual growth and support them in adventuring into what that is. On the other side of it, everything now is like you don't have to necessarily use your imagination as a kid because you've got a video game that shows you everything. When we were kids, we had to, you imagined things, and part of the reasons why books are so powerful is because those images in the book are being played out in the inner screen of your mind. That's why everybody says, oh, I saw the movie, but the book was better. That's because the book was taking place in a part of your soul, the part of yourself that sees inwardly, And then you go see a movie, and even though it can have great special effects and everything like that, it doesn't have the same frequency because the movie's happening in a physical way, where a book is something that you actually experience in a mental or a spiritual way inside yourself, So how does that fit in?
Well, it fits in great, actually. I think you nailed it. I mean, I look around in our digital age that we have now, and I wonder who reads still, and I think that it's a lost art in some ways. I've met many young people recently who say they don't read anymore, and I think that's a shame. I think it accesses a different part of the brain that makes us process information, and you're exactly right when you say it ignites that inner sight. It gives us practice in visualization and using our imagination. And, besides video games or other things or movies or things that give you the visuals for you, you don't have to work quite so hard, so it becomes like a muscle that doesn't get worked. In your meditation events, when people come and listen to your music and you play these two fabulous flutes, I want to hear what you have to say about where that takes you as a musician when you're actually playing. Do you feel yourself still in your body when you're doing this? Or do you have an ascension that happens and something else takes over? Explain that process for us, if you will.
Well, the unique thing about the instruments that I play, the recorder that come in all different sizes, like the soprano, the alto, the tenor, and the bass, is that when you play two of these instruments at one time in harmony, it creates what's called a triharmonic tone, which means that the two physical notes create like this spiritual frequency that you can actually hear as a third note. And when I play those two flutes at one time, and that third note, that frequency, it almost sounds like a buzzing sound inside your body. I can feel that buzzing in my own body, and sometimes my feet are just like vibrating against the floor because there's so much spiritual energy going through my body. And it's a little different for me while I'm playing versus somebody in the audience, because when I'm meditating by myself without playing my flutes, well then, my body relaxes, and eventually it's easier to slip out of your body and tune into and allow my soul to experience the other dimensions, the heavenly dimensions, the spirit worlds, But while I'm playing, I really have to, I'm playing two flutes at one time, I'm adjusting my electronics, I'm doing all these things, and the more I move my hands and adjust things, the more that keeps me in my body. But it's, there's times where the energy in the room is so powerful. to say that you can taste it, it's like it's thick. It's like the air is thick with that spiritual vibration in the room.
Tangible.
But it's different for me when I'm meditating without playing versus when I am playing. And the unique thing about this whole thing, the way it connects to, back to what we were talking about with our imagination, is because the heavenly dimension has a different set of rules than this physical dimension. Okay? So there are certain things that we get used to in this physical reality that we really should not be thinking about in a logical way when we're meditating. Like, for example, in this physical reality, we're all used to dealing with gravity. It's just part of life in this physical world. You can drop a ball on the floor and it's going to fall down to the floor for 100 years if you keep dropping that ball. But the difference between the heavenly reality and this physical reality is that the heavenly world doesn't have gravity. It doesn't have the same limitations as this physical world. And that's why we have dreams where we're flying, and that's why we always see angels that are flying, is because they don't have the same limitations in that dimension, in that heavenly dimension, in the spirit world, that we have here in the physical world. So when you meditate, you don't want to take your limitations that you've grown to accept in the physical world. You don't want to take those limitations into the heavenly world where those limitations don't even exist.
Is it possible to take those limitations into the heavenly realm? Do you think some people die with the unresolved heaviness of emotional stuff, and they take it with them? Because some ghosts that come back or spirits that come back have issues, and they're trying to resolve things. You hear stories like that all the time. So is it possible to resolve that in the physical before you move on? And what happens, do you suppose, if you take it with you? Can you take it with you?
Well, there are a lot of people who were absolute skeptics, who didn't believe in anything spiritual at all, people who are atheists, who believe that when you die, that is it, the TV channel gets turned off, it's over, it's finished. There are a lot of people, once they transition into the heavenly dimension, which is also called death, physically, but once they get to that dimension, it's like they realize that their skepticism was completely wrong. And there are people who come to my events all the time and say, my dad came to me in the meditation, and my dad didn't believe a word of anything spiritual while he was alive. And my dad showed up to me in my meditation. He said, all that stuff, that spiritual stuff you used to talk to me about that I never even wanted to hear 2 words of. But I'm experiencing that in the heavenly dimension now, and you were right. Can you imagine someone's dad who never believed a word of anything spiritual dies, gets to the heavenly dimension, and then appears to his daughter and says, wow, this world really is the way you were explaining it to me. So there are some people who, well, I would have to say that most people have that issue resolved once they do get to heaven, because they get to experience that reality on a daily basis, and they know they're experiencing that dimension without the physical limitations that they thought were reality.
Free of those physical limitations, they can now do the next level of their work. Do you suppose, going back to Salvador Dali, that you were perhaps a vessel for him and you were channeling him?
Oh, well, there's no doubt that I was channeling him. I mean, there's one of the paintings that I made that's called You Are What You Think I Am. And while I was making this painting that was, I think it was 40 inches by 40 inches, right? He kept giving me directions to add certain colors in certain areas. And I was so focused on the colors that he had me add and the different techniques he was teaching me to do that I didn't even realize until 2 weeks after I made the painting that he had superimposed his face into the painting with 2 eyebrows, the eye, and it's like that goofy mustache that goes up like a, the mustache, the Salvador Dali classic mustache,
Sure.
If you saw that painting, it's on my website. I think it's in the area that's called Defined Lines. But can you imagine that imposed his face into my painting, and I didn't even realize it.
I can imagine it. I think you were a vessel, and he was doing more work through you. I believe that's how it works. I think some of these great minds go on, and they're able to come back and find vessels that can continue their work. You hear people suddenly knowing physics, or suddenly knowing higher level mathematics, or genius art levels, and you have to wonder what is working through them. And I think if you can sit down and have a real conversation about it, it might be very interesting to discuss the possibilities. We have a question that has been sent in from Marge.
Okay.
She would like to ask you this question. She says, I wrestle with physical work and spiritual work. It seems like I have more spiritual energy when I'm not working a job. I try to balance them both, but I lose any ability I have when I work. How do you reconcile this in your life? I mean, I need money, and I have nothing sellable if I'm not working. What do I do?
Do you have
It's a good question. It's a good question. No. Well, okay. Let me see if I can reword that a little bit, Marge. You know, this is a big question, David, because a lot of people struggle with working a job, 9 to 5, whatever it is they have to do to pay the bills. And then, you know, with their spiritual calling or their creative work, they do have a hard time balancing it. So what would be your advice?
Okay. Well, my advice would be that you found with the most successful people in life, because I've been involved in music for a long time, which is a very difficult thing. And the people who are most successful are doing things that no one else is willing to do. Okay? So in 1990, when I ran out of money, I was 30 years old, and I was in trouble. I didn't want to go down to Venice Beach and start playing my flute at Venice Beach. Are you kidding me? That was the last place in the world I wanted to go. Are you kidding me? That was like a bum on the street with an instrument. No way. But the only reason why I did it was because I had to do it. I really didn't have a choice, because I was broke and I was in trouble and I was 30 years old, you know. And I have found that when I've done the things in my life that no one else is willing to do, that's what's made me the most successful, you know. I mean, success isn't glamorous in the beginning, and there's lots of steps with success that are not fun, not glamorous, that nobody wants to do. But by doing those things, putting yourself out there in a way where you can share whatever your art or your spirituality is, or if you're a massage therapist or a Reiki practitioner or some kind of healer, you find a way to get yourself out there where nobody else is out there doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I think that answers it very well. Marge, if you'd like to send in another message to clarify anything, I'm watching the screen, so feel free to do so. David, we hear a lot about the divine masculine and feminine energies. What are your thoughts on these two well-known phrases?
Well, I love the feminine energy. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist saying that. I think, what do I think about that? I think that part of humanity getting to this age of ascension that we're in right now is that there's way, way more equality between men and women now than there were, let's say, 2,000 years ago, you know. I mean, 2,000 years ago, men and women did not pray in the same place because women weren't allowed to pray in the same place where the men prayed, you know. And the rights that women had were, well, there really were no rights that they had, basically, you know. And I think now in this age of ascension, I think it's a lot more natural for women to allow themselves to go into their creative part of their mind, or what people call their imagination, you know. And I think that there's a certain part of that that connects with spirituality, because you need to let go of that logical mind. All the things that you think are normal, you got to forget about all those things when you're going into your meditation, because normal is just a gigantic limitation. And I think that, you know, they talk about this thing called mother's intuition, you know. Men have intuition also, but for some reason women are able to tap into that easier than men. And one of the things I notice is that at my events, usually 95% of the people at my events are women, you know. And these are people who are really climbing the spiritual ladder and doing everything they can to become more spiritual and to become more evolved. And it just seems like, you know, because I do all these events all over the place, it just seems like women are waking up spiritually first, you know, because, you know, men are interested in, you know, football and baseball and beer and T-shirts and, you know, whatever stuff that men are interested in. But it does seem like the women are evolving faster than the men. You know, I do notice more men come into my events now versus 3-4 years ago.
I would call that progress.
What's that?
I would call that progress.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. You know, and
do you feel like you embody that essence of the divine masculine energy?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think I'm just trying to make beautiful music and make beautiful art. And
I have to say, I think you do. I'm going to be shocking right now and say this out loud. I think you do. I think I've watched your videos. I've seen your work. I've looked at all your stuff, and I have to say, you have a wonderful balance between your male and female energies, and you're able to make a business out of what you do, which is, I consider like a doing aspect, which I associate with male energy. And then the being aspect in its very minimum form is the feminine energy to me, and I feel that in your music. So I do feel a strong balance. I think you set a very wonderful example for other men. And there has been a lot of talk over the last years. I mean, I've been on the air long enough to know that the divine feminine has been the main topic for years and years, and we've left out the divine masculine, and I think we have to change that. Because the out of balance, we can't give so much to the feminine that we let the masculine, you know, kind of fall behind. And the women do have an ability to bring the man forward. And I think the intuition that grows very strong in a woman is because we grow babies in our stomach and we have that ability to nurture the way a mother does versus a father, I think. I hate to say that because some people take offense, but I think it's true. I've had 2 kids myself, and it has certainly made me a much more intuitive person going through motherhood. Of course, they're grown now, but I have to say that the intuition was the greatest gift I got from having children, the depth of it. And if you're not nurturing that, then it tends to be really difficult for people, especially when they're hit so hard with the 9-to-5 job, having to pay your bills and sustain. I mean, our society really doesn't nurture that intuitive, dreaming, imaginative type of space where I think most of us really need to be able to go to at any time to rejuvenate it, if anything. So,
well, that's interesting way that you brought that up, because now that I think about it, you know, before I started playing the flute at Venice Beach, I was playing rock music, you know, which is a real masculine energy kind of thing. And when I started playing the flutes at Venice Beach with this woman who played the harp, I mean, a flute and a harp, it's a very feminine, soft sound. And I found that, you know, women really responded to that sound. And so because survival is a great teacher, you know, my survival instincts were like, wow, the more I make this beautiful, soft, feminine music, the more successful I seem to be getting, you know, over the last 30 years of doing this. And so that was me embodying, I guess, part of the feminine energy, because I was creating music that was more feminine than masculine, without a doubt. And then when I started to paint, you know, there are certain colors that are more masculine, and there are certain colors that are more feminine. You know, to me, colors that are more like watercolor colors have more of a feminine vibration to it, where, you know, there are harsher colors, more, you know, more bold colors that are more masculine, you know. And one of the things that I found in my paintings was that the more feminine energy I put into my paintings, the more people liked it. So I guess with my music and my art, I've had to learn how to balance my feminine energy with my masculine energy, so this way it would be more appealing to people, and it would touch people, because those colors have a frequency that people resonate with.
Well, I think you nailed it on the head. I think you are a vessel for the divine masculine energy. In fact, you have a new book coming out about Jesus and Magdalene. Can you share a little bit about that so we can get really excited and buy a copy when it comes out?
Oh my gosh, it's such an incredible story. You know what I mean? I feel like why am I always the last to know what Spirit is doing through me? You know, because I'll be doing something, having no idea really why I'm doing something. Like I made these paintings that I didn't even know that these paintings would be part of a book that would be telling the story of what actually happened with Jesus and Mary Magdalene 2,000 years ago. Now, everybody knows that Jesus was Jewish and that his real name was Yeshua, but most people don't know that he was also a rabbi, and most people don't know that in order to be a rabbi, you have to have two things before you can become a rabbi, and that is you have to have a wife and you have to have children, or else you can't become a rabbi. And Mary Magdalene was Jesus' wife. The reason why they took her out of the Bible was just because they wanted to make him look like he was God's only son, which isn't really true, because we all have this potential. And she was not only his life partner and his wife, but she was his soul's equal. They are soulmates. They're getting ready to celebrate 2,000 happy years of marriage. You know, it's going to be a pretty big party.
You hear a lot about Magdalene and the Magdalene energies. A lot of the New Age industry goes deeply into that work. It's kind of cliche, if you will, across the board, really. But if you don't mind all that, then you go into the fact that this is really real energy. It's symbolic even, too. The Magdalene and the Jesus energy, the male, the female energy, you know, that we have inside of each of us, and however we express it or where we're stronger or weaker, you know, really does give us a gauge to decide on where we want to put our energies and how we manifest things and how we get through life. I don't think it's a cliche. I think it's kind of been made into a thing where people talk about the divine feminine, Mary Magdalene, oh, we're going to channel her. I once heard a man speak behind the scenes. I won't share his name, but he says to me out loud, if I had $1 for every woman that claimed she was the reincarnated Magdalene, I'd be a rich man. And he laughed. And I said, you want to hear what I said, David?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You want to hear what I said? It's pretty funny. And I said, well, lucky you. That's a lot of Magdalene energy to be around. What did you do with all of it? And he just looked at me and he just was dumbfounded. So here's the thing. I think that he's kind of right. Like, women do tend to really align with the Magdalene energies. And for some reason, it brings something up inside of them that needs to come out. And I don't know. I want to know what you would have said to him.
Well, honestly, I can't even think about what I would say to him. I just want to address the fact that what he said, that all of these people that he's met, all these women that he's met, feel like they're the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene. And I think that opens up the discussion about reincarnation. Because I used to think that when a person became really super spiritual, that you didn't have to reincarnate anymore because, you know, you passed all your earthly tests and now you can just stay in heaven forever. Oh my God, I wish that was the truth. But the truth is that in this age of ascension that we're living in, the archangels are reincarnating every spiritual soul as many times as possible, because all of these spiritual souls are being reincarnated now to help with the ascension that humanity is going through. Now, if you think about it, one of the things that's in my book is how Mary Magdalene saved him. Okay, he didn't die on the cross. He lived to be 72 years old. She lived to be in her 50s. They had 3 children from the time he was 30 to 33 years old. And when that terrible thing happened, Mother Mary took over guardianship of their children, and she figured out how to save them and how to escape. And they escaped, and they eventually made their way to France. It took them years to get there. Okay? And if she could figure out how to save his life, then that means she is a super intelligent, creative person. And that's why her soul has been reincarnated so many times. I've met at least 15 people who, when they told me their whole story and how many different amazing things have been orchestrated in their life, I come from an absolute skeptical background of any of this stuff. And if somebody could convince me of something like this being true, then that means it's gone through my skeptical self, and if they can convince me, then it's got to be real, because I have a skeptical background. And I have to tell you that it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that I say at my events is that the most reincarnated soul of all time that I know of is Mary Magdalene, because there's got to be a reason why her soul has been, the positive qualities, like the DNA qualities of her soul. There's got to be a reason why God keeps reincarnating her soul into so many people. You know what I mean?
Well said. Yeah.
That's not and I have to tell you, if I hadn't experienced what I've experienced in the last couple of years at my events, with people sharing these experiences at my events that confirmed the feelings that they had all their life. I mean, there are lots of people who had experiences their whole life, either knowing that they were one of Jesus and Mary Magdalene's children, and that got confirmed at my meditation event, or knowing that they, in that other lifetime, they were Mary Magdalene. And man, these people have stuff that you just could not make up. It's a serious thing, It's an amazing thing. And one of the really important things for people to understand about reincarnation is that it is not linear. It's not like there's one Moses, so there can only be one Moses now. It's not linear. There can be more than one reincarnation of the same soul alive on Earth at the same time.
Speaking of that, what do you think about music being a full brain activator that it is, helps to unlock genetic memories that we have inside of us? Talk about that, if you will, for a little bit.
Well, can you go into that question a little deeper, because I feel like there's a little bit more to that question.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I'm of the belief that we carry genetic memories of our ancestral lines, each and every single one of us. We have the DNA of every ancestor that has come before us. So if we have that inside of us and we get into a certain state of being, like meditation or listening to music such as yours, or creating artwork, that meditative creative space, that we actually have access to those in the same way that you were just describing. Mary Magdalene is a little piece of all of us, and I think she represents love. I think what her and Jesus had was the kind of quality of love that has the ability to save, to heal, to change the world. And I think one of the biggest threats to today's world is the reemergence of that kind of powerful love, which is why you see so much fear and so much everything all over. But the genetic memories that we hold inside of us, I always have felt that sound was a really important trigger to helping those come to the surface.
Well, this is the way that I understand what happens with the music and how this connects to everything, right? So people who have had near-death experiences, when they come to my event, they often say that the closest thing they've ever heard to the musical sounds and frequencies that they heard while they had their near-death experience is the music that I create at these events with my two flutes and the different sounds that I create, okay? So knowing that there are different spiritual sounds in heaven, and when we hear those sounds physically, it kind of calls our soul and awakens our soul to open up to it. It's almost like like the music is like a calling of our soul to go back to heaven. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so, because when I play these two flutes, it creates that third frequency, that third note, which is like this heavenly sound. Let's say, for example, let's say a person is listening to headphones. Let's say they're listening to ocean waves. Now, that person, before they put on the headphones with the ocean waves, that person's been to the beach 100 times in their life, and they associate what the ocean looks like with what the ocean sounds like, okay, and also with what the ocean smells like, right? So let's say that person, after being at the ocean 100 times, puts on some headphones, has some ocean waves playing, they're listening to the ocean waves, and after 10 minutes, they're starting to see in their third eye what the ocean looks like. The reason why that's happening is because your mind has experienced the sound of the ocean before, at the same time that your mind experienced what the ocean looks like. So your mind naturally recreates the visual of the ocean while you're listening to the sound of the ocean in your head. So what happens with the music is that when people hear music that has a heavenly vibration, your soul naturally starts to envision where they heard that spiritual sound before, and that was in the heavenly dimension. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if we have this phenomena happening in people who experience your music, which, by the way, I've never met anybody in my entire life that can play two flutes at the same time. You did it in person for me, so I know it's a surreal thing. It's fantastic. But I can also see how those music waves would interact. The diffraction between those waves would cause a true phenomena. And I really can understand how this would help shift people versus something that isn't that. I'm curious if you have, what kind of healing that you have seen besides just mental or spiritual or emotional. Have you had any people who have experienced physical healing?
Oh, without a doubt. There's a woman who came to 10 of my events, and she has had cancer, pretty serious cancer, and she came to an event a couple of years ago, and she said that the pain that she was living with, if 10 is the worst pain in the world, that was what she was living with. And Mother Mary showed up to her with Jesus, and believe it or not, John Lennon and George Harrison, because they're all very close friends, you know. And Mother Mary gave this healing to her, and she was completely pain-free for 48 hours after the event.
That's unbelievable. And your music is played in hospitals. It's considered one of the most healing, soothing sounds. Hospitals have had great feedback from your work. We are actually running out of time. I want to give you a few minutes to talk about what you have coming up so people can perhaps experience what we've been talking about for the last hour.
Sure.
I also want to remind people that they can go to davidyoungart.com to see more about your work. So what do you have going on that people can actually participate?
Well, I have events coming up, these Portal Between Heaven and Earth events they're all over the place. The other website I have that has more information about these events is davidyoungmusic.com. And there's a calendar on the right side of the website, and I have like 15 or 16 events every month, you know, all over the United States. So just try to find some place where you can come. And the other thing is that the digital version of my book, The True Story of Jesus and His Wife, Mary Magdalene, the digital book will be available in about 3 or 4 weeks. And there's a newsletter that's on my website that you can sign up for. So this way, when the digital version is ready, if you want a digital version, and there's also going to be an audiobook of this that I just finished, that'll be ready in about 3 or 4 weeks. But the paper books, those will be back in 2 months. So by the beginning of November, the paper books, which are 10 inches by 13 inches, and they're every page is in full color, that has my paintings that are all interconnected with the story. And one of the cool things about the paper book is that there's 12 QR codes about every 3 or 4 pages during the book. And those QR codes link you to 12 songs that have been chosen for the book. So as you're reading this book, you can click on, scan the QR code with your phone, so you hear the soundtrack that was picked out. And the way the soundtrack was chosen was, because I have 60 albums of music, I inwardly asked that the family, that's what I call them, is the family. I asked them, what music should I choose? And during the part of the book where it talks about Jesus and Mary Magdalene living in this cave in the south of France, the song that they chose was The Hidden Reality.
Perfect way to end the show tonight. David, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure having this wonderful conversation. I know many people are enjoying it as well. David Young, twice Grammy-nominated, multifaceted musician, visionary artist, and author. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Hillary Raimo. Until next time, namaste.